Hello, welcome to Atheist Torah Study. My name is Emma, and I'm the host. Today is Parsha Tazria and Metzora. This is the 27th and 28th Parshas of the Torah cycle. And these Parshas are all about disgust. We'll be talking a lot about disgust and the role that it plays in the human evolutionary process and how the concept of disgust is encoded in the text and what it says on an evolutionary basis about human, I don't know, human behavior, along with a lot of other really interesting things. So let's dive into the text. Here goes. So if you're following along, this is the Book of Leviticus. It's the third book of the Torah, and it's chapter 12. And this is part of the entire book of Leviticus is written um, from the perspective of the P writer, which is it's concerned with issues around priests and the temple, these real world things that existed in the ancient world. And this is the authorship of the people who felt some concern about those things, but also, kind of going in line with my previous Torah studies. This is also about the efforts of the authors during the Hasmonean era to create a religious document that was all encompassing and that centralized worship, centralized kind of a religious nationalism for the people at that time. So it was an early attempt to create a religious nationalism that helped to forge a particular identity. And this is very common nowadays. It's been common, really throughout history. This is another example of it. And so, in a way, this is like these people and it's their story. But it's also a story that has been encoded in Jewish experience. And so it also has a meaning up through the present, but it's not necessarily meant, even within Jewish tradition, to be understood as being relevant to how you understand the world today or how you understand yourself. I mean, you could read it that way if you want to, and a lot of people do, especially people who read the text the first time, and some people who read the text over and over. But it's not necessarily meant to apply to anything today. I mean, it was really meant um, as a document to apply to life in the third century BC. So, anyways, here goes. Tazria. God spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the Israelite people, when a woman at childbirth bears a male, she shall be impure 7 days. She shall be impure at the time of her condition of menstrual separation." So this is text that was written by I mean, it's not necessarily understandable, but I mean, a straight read of it to me, if I was just doing a straight read of the text, I would say that the text creates this idea that there's something about menstruation that makes a person unclean, and it reinforces a patriarchal worldview that segregates women from an expression of religious experience for the culture. So it's one of, an infinite number of cultural signifiers that tries to diminish women's status within a patriarchal culture. And in this sense, it fits into a broader context of uh, patriarchal religious monotheism, because all three of the world's monotheistic religions are intensely patriarchal, and they're overly concerned with warfare, with domination, with population control, with religious authoritarianism, and with creating propaganda and documents that ensure their authenticity, the authenticity of those holders of religious power and those holders of um, patriarchal power. And this is one way to look at this. But there's also there are many ways to look at this. And one of the beauties of Jewish tradition is that Jewish tradition explores all of the ways. And it creates here the text creates a touchstone for um, a space into women's authentic experience. Because it's just it's incredibly concerned with the body. And we'll be reading a lot more about the body in this text. And I don't know of other religious texts that have the same kind of overwhelming obsession and concern with the body. Um, Part of what's interesting here is that within the canon of Western art, the body is always the central metaphor in the artistic production that's really relevant to the culture. And there isn't as much body as you think there would be in the text, but here the body is really central. The experience of the body, the function of the body, the placement of the body within the context of physical space, the meaning of the body. Everything here is all about the body. And so this elevates the text in a way to this have the incorporation of interest into the same topic of art that so much of the higher arts of Western canon are concerned with. I mean, and I'm not just talking about visual art, I'm talking about literature, I'm talking about um, sculpture. So within at least, and I'm talking about dance too. I mean, within these four areas of and theater, so five. I mean, within these areas of artistic production, the body is central to each mode of production. And here, the body is central to the text. So this really is one of the central places in the Torah where the text elevates the body to a place where it can be comparable to other Western literature that's survived. Anyways, let's keep on reading. Oh, and I do want to talk about the evolutionary expression of disgust. So the the idea of disgust is a very old evolutionary concept. It's it's rooted. I've been reading a book this week about disgust because I was motivated to study more about disgust after reading Tazria and Metzora because I realized that so much of the text is concerned with things that are considered disgusting. And it's curious to me, like, why would a religious text spend so much time on concepts that are considered disgusting? Um, and what is it about disgust that is, in a way, sort of elevated? Because this is about what to do if you've experienced disgust and how to get yourself ritually clean. And this assumes that there's something about the expression of disgust and the experience of disgust that would make you unclean as opposed to clean. And I think that that's a pretty universal condition. I mean, there's things that you won't do because you think it's disgusting. Like, I mean, I could think of a few examples, and actually, the text is full of them. Those usually have some foundation within our evolutionary process. But the reason that there's a consideration of them as disgust is complex. So let's just talk with this very first one. As we're going through the text, we'll explore different ideas of disgust and how those might function on an evolutionary basis, if there is any. Because another thing about the text and the Torah is that it's often that oftentimes you can't really find anything rational to connect with in the text. And it's really one of the problems. It's one of the reasons that it's not that easy to read the text as an atheist, because there's not necessarily something to connect with um, from the lens of an atheist. But after 10 years of doing Torah study, I've learned how to connect almost all of the text in almost any direction that I want it to go. So I'm going to really try with this. So let's talk about this. I'll read the first line one more time. Speak to the Israelite people thus: when a woman at childbirth bears a male, she shall be impure 7 days. She shall be impure as at the time of her condition of menstrual separation. So it's saying a couple of things there. It's saying that when, oh, and it's actually saying more than a couple of things. Okay, so it's saying when a woman bears a male. I mean, as the transgender person, it's hard for me to connect with this right away because you're assigning the gender of a child without their consent. And, as someone who's transgender, I can tell you that it would be much nicer for the child if you allowed them to consent to their gender identity. Um, and I mean, I will say that I've found Jewish spaces to be just the most friendly when it comes to inclusiveness of trans and non-binary identities. And so, um, I'm not like trying to criticize those spaces at all. I'm just saying that here the text becomes problematic right away, just as it always does for atheist Torah study. The text is always problematic, and I must never get through anything in the text because it's so problematic. But again, so when a woman at childbirth bears a male, so this child is being assigned a male. Oh, excuse me. She shall be impure 7 days. She shall be impure as at the time of her condition of menstrual separation. So it's important here to understand that um, it's important here to understand that the idea of impurity, which is generally understood as being unclean or somehow not um, less than dirty. Oh, excuse me. Um, it's it's not necessarily understood that way. What it's really understood as in the text is it's understood as ritually impure. So it just means that someone isn't necessarily appropriate for a ritual process, but it doesn't mean unclean morally. Um, it doesn't mean unclean physically either. It just means that it's perhaps ritually unclean. So that's important to understand. I mean, I think that the writers of the text probably understood it that way. I think that um I think that generally within Jewish tradition today it's understood that way. But I think that in the interpretation of the text as it gets reinterpreted over and over again, every generation and every year, and by every person who reads the text. Oh, sorry. I think that the text really loses its meaning that way, and it becomes reinterpreted um, as morally unclean somehow. There's something about menstruation. So so let's look at that for a minute, and let's talk about why would menstruation be something, or childbirth for that matter, be something that would create a sense of separation. I mean, what is that about? Why would it do that? So I think that from an evolutionary point of view, I mean, I think that there's two ends of the same space there. So menstruation um, signals that there's a period of time in which fertility or conception isn't necessarily going to happen. And so, from an evolutionary perspective, it might be understood as a time when procreative sex isn't necessarily um, functional. But the thing about the way that human beings have evolved is that human beings have evolved um, um, with um, what's it called? With like masked. Um, I'm sorry. With masked. Um, I can't think of the words. Anyways, the point is that fertility within humans is with other animals when they're ready for mating and when they're ready for reproduction, they'll do things to really indicate their receptiveness. Um, but with Homo sapiens, there's it's different. Basically, a person doesn't necessarily show receptivity. I mean, I think that we're able to read the cues of that now, but the way that evolution has created us is so that it seems like you're basically receptive all the time. Um, and there's only very specific times when you're really not receptive. And those are a couple of those times are referred to at the very beginning of this text. So, you know, a woman at childbirth, and as the time of menstrual separation. Now, what the text does here, something else that the text does that's really interesting, is that the text right here, and this is how it gets reinterpreted from a feminist lens, and it's really the beginning of like the ability to step into the text from a feminist perspective. So one of the things that the text does here that's really interesting is that it takes these experiences that are very female-centered um, experiences, or if I'm trying to be, if I'm trying to use language, I don't really use it, but if I was trying to use language that's more engaged with how we look at gender now, you'd say like a person with uterus, or a person capable of menstruation, rather than female-centered. But I'm going to use female-centered because, I mean, I'm just a little old school that way. So, like, this is this really centers female experience in a way. And one of the things that the text does, and it's not necessarily, I don't even know if the authors of the text intend to do this when they wrote the text, although I think that they may have intended to do it. But one of the things that the text does is it centers female experience. And so then it creates a space within the text where female centeredness is just absolutely foundational to how the text is understood, what the meaning of the text is. And by creating space within the text for like female centered experience, it also encompasses so many other aspects of female centered experience. So it creates a space for language and a space for comparison and a space for storytelling and a space for female engagement. And it does this again through the body. I mean, it roots itself in the body, and by rooting the text in the body and being so specific about the function of the body, it creates an instantaneous universal connectedness that has some kind of meaning for almost anyone who experiences menstruation or who has who has a period. And it tells the story not just of like one particular experience of menstruation, but it tells the experience of menstruation like over an entire lifetime. I mean, the experience of that is implicit within the text and the consequence and the function of menstruation. So there's something about the text right away that acknowledges the very basic reproductive nature of human existence. And it really centers that. That's really centered at the very middle of the Parsha. It's centered right there. And it's really powerful. I mean, it's a really powerful place to put the text. So, I mean, as an atheist, I mean, would I consider this to be, I mean, I don't really have a particular, I mean, the commentary that I have as an atheist has more to do with the ways in which the text is interpreted that seem to diminish female experience. And, to talk about the long history of patriarchy and the way in which patriarchy, how patriarchy has utilized religion, specifically Western religion, as a way to foundationally ground the violence and the authoritarianism of patriarchy against women's bodies and against trans and queer bodies as a consequence of the the efforts to control female bodies. So, and as we read more, we will see that um, there is some connections here with. Um, I just lost my train of thought. Okay, let's just go on then. Okay, so whew, the next line is so we jump from one oh yeah, another thing about this is oftentimes religions will create strange rituals that are firmly grounded within bodily experience as a way of creating a sense of obedience and a sense of connection to the religion. So by grounding a female-centered experience that's almost entirely universal among people with a uterus or people who do menstruate, by creating a ritual that applies to all people with those experiences. It's a way of grounding them in the religion and providing them with a really, really deep connection to the religion. Now, there's a lot of other places I mean, there's so many places in Tazria Metzora where the text is just super problematic and where, the idea of centering the text with women's experience is just not, clearly not the intention, where women are clearly property, where they're clearly chattel, where they're clearly objects. But here, the woman is not an object. Here, clearly, the woman is at the very center of the text. And the reason that the female is at the center of the text and the center of the experience is because she's named right away. Like a woman is named, and something that's an essential part of what it means to be a woman is named right away. So, right after this, the text jumps into this very next line. The next line is, on the eighth day, the flesh of his foreskin shall be circumcised. So let's talk about circumcision for a minute. So we've jumped from female centeredness and female centered experience to one of right away, we've stepped right into what was literally for centuries one of the hallmarks of Jewish identity was circumcision. So this falls in alignment with the way in which bodies are marked as a way of identifying with a religious tradition. And so there are examples from cultures all around the world of having different kinds of body markings, and those body markings be a central way of identifying um, a connection to and identification with a particular set of religious practices. So in that way, circumcision is not unique. Um, I think probably that, I mean, I think probably that circumcision is probably very painful. I think that the idea that it's not, I mean, I've seen circumcisions happen before, and I think that the child is usually kind of stunned by what's happening to them. And I think that it creates a tremendous sense of trauma for children. Um, but it's something that parents continue to do to their children. It's central to, how Jews feel about, well, not all Jews get circumcised, but a lot do. And it says a lot about how, like, what it means to be Jewish. It's like, the idea that since there's a prescription for circumcision in the Torah, that means that that's what you do to your children. And that's, foundationally, that clearly identifies this as a religion, and it clearly identifies it as a religious experience. So, and as an atheist, I think that, I mean, I don't see any reason to do it, I mean, I really don't. I mean, I don't see how this has anything to do with, with a god or with anything related to a god. I mean, it does because it's in the text. I mean, the authors chose to put this in the text. I mean, but why did they put it in the text? I mean, so I didn't pull up a lot of source sheets on this text. I mean, I did a lot of studying for the text, but I didn't put up a lot of I didn't put up a lot of source sheets. But I was curious about circumcision. So I did a little bit of investigation into circumcision just to understand a little bit more about its history. So here's what I found. The earliest evidence of circumcision as a human cultural practice was Egyptian, and it was around 2400 BCE. Wall paintings in tombs show circumcisions being performed. Some scholars think it was associated with purity, hygiene, or a priestly class. So this is really interesting that circumcision had its origins in Egyptian religious experience because there's so many other places in the Torah where there's such a really strong connection between Egyptian ideas about how to do religious rituals or what a story means. There's so many places where there's a really direct connection with Egyptian culture. So it's really interesting that this is a ritual that had some sort of meaning to, I mean, we don't know how much of Egyptian religious experience was connected to a practice of circumcision, but there's evidence of it. And here's a Jewish experience of circumcision. So, I mean, the question is, was Jewish experience imitating Egyptian? So that's one theory, which is certainly plausible. Or was it even more so than that? Was Egyptian experience of religious ritual incorporated into the text because there were Egyptians who became Jewish? Like they didn't necessarily convert, but they brought with them a set of religious practices that were understood as Egyptian, but they brought them with them to their new place, wherever they lived. Here it was Canaan. And maybe they mixed with the locals and became part of whatever the religion was at the time, the Yahwism that seemed to exist before Judaism. And they brought their own flavor of how to do religious practice with them into whatever was widely practiced within the places where they settled. And then that became, over time, slowly adopted by whatever the dominant religious practice was at that place, which in this case was Yahwism. And eventually this migrated into what is now Judaism. And it's forever canonized, it's forever kind of frozen once the text is redacted. Once the text is redacted and it's universalized, then it moves from something that had kind of a natural migration pattern. It was kind of reflecting the movement of cultures from one place to the next. And now it's been frozen into the text. And so it becomes, in a way, universal because the text has migrated the ritual into something that's easily transportable. Anyways, a little bit more about circumcision. Um, Circumcision in Torah becomes significant in Genesis chapter 17. God commands Avram to circumcise himself and all male descendants as a sign of the covenant. Of course, how could I forget that? So, this act of body modification is connected to the idea of a covenant between the God and the people. And so it has implicit religious meaning. This religious ritual has implicit religious meaning, and it's super problematic. I mean, I've only gotten two verses into Tazria Metzora today, which is not unusual for me. But this is super problematic because it's talking about the relationship between men and women and about experiences that are foundational to male experience and to female experience right away here. And it's it's elevating male experience, and it's saying that if you have a certain kind of male experience, then the experience that you have is a symbol of the covenant between the deity and all the people. But it's only ritualized through female experience. Now, later on, you know, a feminist interpretation of this, which started to become more common like in the 70s and 80s, as Judaism was kind of reworking the meaning of some of this. Um, a female interpretation of this that is kind of more feminist in its orientation might be that women, through the act of childbirth and through the act of holding that space. I mean, you wouldn't have any Judaism, you wouldn't have any Jewish experience if you didn't have women, and if you didn't have childbirth, and if you didn't have menstruation, then there would be no next generation. And so there's this acknowledgement that seems to be implicit within the text that female centeredness is actually encoded within the text because it appears right away at the very beginning. And the female encoded narrative is actually presented before the male encoded narrative. And the male encoded narrative in this part of the text is foundationally receptive. So the male character, the male body in this text is the receiver of ritual body modification. And so in a way, and in a way the text creates it kind of reverses genders here. It reverses the function of gender because it makes the male embodied experience something that's fundamentally receptive, because here it's being receptive. But I mean, we're talking about children. So although in the Torah, people can get circumcised at any time in life. I mean, Avram circumcises himself when he is, pretty old. But generally here it's telling you to circumcise your child when they're 8 days old. And again, I just think, this is not, I mean, I can't have children because I'm transgender. And so I don't have children, I just have cats. And of course, I'm not good. Although I did spay and neuter my cats. So, you know, I actually did do something somewhat analogous. It's not quite the same thing. Of course, and I didn't do it. I had, veterinarian, you know, professionals do it, but it, it's, there's no comparison between cats and humans. I mean, I'm just kind of making a little joke there, but, you know, the, I think that the idea of ritually, I think the idea of ritually altering the body of a child is just fundamentally problematic. I mean, I don't think it's the same as female genital mutilation, but just the fact that I can even think about it as something that's comparable tells me that this is problematic. And I mean, you can argue that there's medical reasons for doing circumcision. I mean, that was the standard argument throughout the 20th century. I mean, the vast, vast majority of males in the United States in the 20th century were circumcised. It was just considered something that you did to a baby before it could consent. And I think the problem with doing any kind of like, body modification, body scarification, uh, on a child is that the child can't consent. And I just think that's super problematic. I mean, I think that the very first way that circumcision happened was it happened with adults. And, if you want to alter your body as an adult, then you have every right to. You're welcome to do it. And that's what Abraham chose to do. But this kind of goes, I mean, this tells you a story about how religious ritual gets encoded within the culture. And, and in a way, it's, again, this is another hypertext moment here, because in a way, this isn't really about the religious ritual of circumcision. This is really about the exercise of control over the children. And it's one of the many ways in which the text tries to show that indoctrination of children is a social good, and that the indoctrination of children is foundational to the continuity of the religion. And as atheists, of course, we point this out because it's important to acknowledge that one of the ways in which religion maintains its control over societies is through the indoctrination of children. And the fact that we're having a discussion here about, a baby, I mean, we're not even talking about someone who's able to begin to explore their values and question the meaning of their experiences. We're talking about a baby, something that's so completely helpless that it doesn't have any rational faculty um, to really speak or to in any way kind of engage with its environment. And it's already being indoctrinated. I mean, it's being indoctrinated in one of the most significant ways that you can indoctrinate a human being, by ritually scarring their body. But that implies that you're not just doing that to their body, but that you're also ritually indoctrinating them into everything about their religion. I mean, the ideology of their religion. And this isn't even about the baby, it's really about the commitment of the parents to indoctrinate their children. I mean, the parents are really making a covenant with themselves that they're going to indoctrinate their child fully into the overarching religious narrative of their environment by making this body modification to their child. And so the text moves so far I mean, it moves so far beyond the body, but the body is still central here. I mean, you have sympathy for the body, and the body is a source of debate. The body is the grounds of debate. Now, what does that mean? What is the circumcision? Does circumcision have any kind of meaning from an evolutionary perspective? I mean, is there anything about circumcision that mitigates disgust? Because disgust, as we've discussed earlier, plays an evolutionary role in, I mean, it teaches you things that you're supposed to avoid. I didn't mention all of the things, but I mean, it talks about food that you're supposed to avoid if you want to survive. So it talks about survival, it talks about reproduction. It also talks about in-group status. So what makes you a member of the group? I mean, um, what makes you a member of the group? And here, the idea of circumcision actually deeply connects to in-group identification. I mean, so you know that you're a Jew if you're circumcised. That's one of the ways you know if somebody's a Jew. I mean, never mind that the Romans also practiced circumcision. And of course, like we said, the Egyptians did, and there were probably other cultures that practiced circumcision. What I read here was circumcision was also practiced in other parts of sub-Saharan Africa among some Semitic groups, and later among people in Australia and the Pacific Islands. And many of these societies had functioned as an initiation rite, marking the transition from boyhood to manhood. and it was often accompanied by other ceremonies. So, um, in the Greco-Roman world, by contrast, circumcision was widely rejected in ancient Greece and in ancient Rome, where the intact foreskin was culturally valued. Circumcision was sometimes stigmatized as barbaric or foreign. And this became especially an intense clash during the Maccabean revolt, when Jewish practices, including circumcision, were suppressed and resisted. So, again, the idea of religious identity and religious identification being central, and we just can't escape the body. The body keeps on coming up over and over again here. So, as an atheist, what do I have to say? I mean, atheists, we don't have these kinds of rituals. I mean, we don't have rituals for things that you have to do to your body in order to be included with other atheists. I mean, atheism is something that sits here and examines this and looks at this, but it's not necessarily, atheism isn't necessarily creating um, language or ritual or some kind of foundational documents or foundational perspectives as it relates to the body. But what atheism does do is atheism embraces science, and science is very interested in the body. I mean, science is so interested in the body that science was able, over the course of a few hundred years, to track the evolution of the body and to create a theory for how the body moved through time. And so, in a way, you know, biology and the sciences are comparable to the text because they ground some parts of natural science, ground the experience of the body as a foundational narrative within the telling of the scientific story. So, you can have the body. I mean, the body is also central to science. As we see here, it's central to the text in Leviticus. But it has a different kind of centrality. And this text was never able to produce a theory of evolution. This text was never able to produce an innate understanding of the history of the body over time. It certainly never said that we were connected with apes or that humans and animals came from the same place. It never really understood that germs exist. Although it knew that something like germs existed, it acknowledges in other parts of the text that we won't get to today. The text acknowledges something that seems like germs. It acknowledges that there's something that seems like germs that happens in society, and that it's something worth looking into and trying to understand. So, yeah, so that's where we are. We've gotten through two verses. I guess I'll try to read just a little bit more. Let's see. I guess I'll read just a little bit more. She shall remain in a state of blood purification for 33 days. She shall not touch any consecrated thing, nor enter the sanctuary until her period of purification is completed. If she bears a female, she shall be impure 2 weeks, as during her menstruation, and she shall remain in a state of blood purification for 66 days. So, I don't know if I probably should have looked into this before I did the Parsha, but I don't know that I totally understand exactly what the text here means by blood purification. Um, I don't know. Let me look that up while I'm sitting here talking just to see what does it mean? Blood purification. Let's see, what does it say here? It says blood purification changes its meaning. It's too much. In a Jewish context, blood purification doesn't really mean cleaning the blood in a physical sense. It's about ritual purity, uh, a system of symbolic categories. So, tuma versus tahara. In Judaism, the key framework is tuma, ritual impurity, which we're talking about right here, and tahara, ritual purity, as described in the Book of Leviticus. These states are not about hygiene or morality, like I was saying earlier. They're about whether someone is in the right condition to participate in a sacred act, like entering the temple. Certain conditions created ritual impurities such as menstruation, childbirth, seminal emission, and contact with a dead body. Purification um, involves waiting a set period of time, sometimes immersion in a mikveh. The point is that nothing is cleaned out of the blood. The person is transitioning from one ritual status to another. So this is basically saying after a woman has had a child, then for 33 days she can't touch anything that's sacred in the temple. So it's made her unclean or yeah, unclean. That's ritually unclean. So as an atheist, I mean, you know, I have to reject all of this because there's nothing about childbirth that would make you unclean or I mean, if I even had a religious practice that I was going to encourage somebody to go to as a female, I wouldn't tell them that after they'd had a child that, then they shouldn't touch anything or be near anything that's part of the ritual for 33 days. What I will say about this is that, I mean, I think that based on my own understanding of talking to people who've had children, is that the experience of having a child is one of the most profound experiences you can have in your life. And so this might just be a way of saying, oh, take some space, take some time off. This is like the Shabbat of all Shabbats, and you want to take some time off and really enjoy yourself. And kind of understand this profound experience that you've had. And so, in a way, it's kind of saying that it almost makes you more pure, more holy, more in touch with the fundamental forces of the universe by having a child, which, is certainly one way to look at childbirth. Anyways, well, I'm out of time. I've made it through 3 verses. I'm very proud of myself. I made it through 3 verses of Tazria, and that's as far as I got. There's lots more good stuff here. So if you want to read some stuff that'll kind of make your skin crawl and make you think about the role of disgust in evolution, and that will make you feel connected with your Jewish religious experience, then I encourage you to read Tazria and Metzora and tell me what you think. If you want to find out more about Atheist Torah Study, you can you can find me on TikTok. I'm on TikTok and I'm on YouTube, and I also have a weekly Parsha that I put on Medium. So under the title Atheist Torah Study. Anyway, so that's all I've got. Thanks so much for listening to this week's episode of Atheist Torah Study on Parsha Tazria Metzora, and I'll see you next week.